Indeed. Yeah.
I'm just going to be laughing about
I
that
guess I'll
banner.
Hello. Good evening, folks. My name is Ultra David, and with me, Mr. James Chen. How's it going tonight?
Going pretty good. How's everybody else out there going right now?
I don't know. I hope everybody is doing better than we are. We both got stuck in LA traffic tonight on the way over here and barely got things going in time. That's definitely something we got to worry about being in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
By the way, thanks to Matt F., a.k.a. Stumblebee, Epileptic Gaming Stumblebee, for making us this card that we showed at the beginning. Probably not going to be the card that we use long term, but it's awesome. Yeah, right there. Strategy, analysis,
esports,
esports. But yeah, anyway, thanks for doing that. That was really nice of you.
Yeah. Cool.
For sure.
So yeah, I definitely want to thank everyone for tuning in today. So, because I'm sure a lot of you guys just came from Wake Up SRK. And
actually, I don't think that happened tonight because Ski Sonic is down in New Orleans.
Oh, really?
Right, for a tournament down there.
Oh,
so
there you go.
Last time I heard that wasn't going to happen, like I said, we both just came in late, so I don't really know what was happening. But as far as I know, it didn't happen.
Okay.
But definitely normally, just before our show is Wake Up SRK with Keats and Ski Sonic, and they go over all sorts of news about the community, all sorts of good stuff like that.
Right, and then after us, of course, is going to be Cross Counter with Mike Ross and Gutex, who, I hope a lot of people tuned in earlier on the day, they were doing a live Street Fighter Cross Tekken stream with Maximilian and Evil Elvis as well.
Right,
so.
That was actually really cool. I took time out of the middle of my day to just sit there and watch the whole thing.
Someone kept sending them text messages.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah, who was that?
That might have been me.
Asking about auto block gems and stuff.
It's so good. It sounds amazing. It sounds super good. And actually, we'll get to talk about that tomorrow, because tomorrow at Wednesday Night Fights, where you and I will always be, brought to you by Level Up, there's going to be a showing of Street Fighter Cross Tekken there.
That's right.
Same build that was used today.
Yeah, so it's actually not the final build as we were told last week.
Right. Yeah, we got that wrong. It's not the final build, but it is the build that was shown today. And there's going to be, we'll have some hours with the game, however long Wednesday Night Fight usually lasts, which is a pretty long time. And lots of top level players there. It won't just be restricted to top level players though. Anybody can come. There are going to be 8 setups.
That's right.
Make sure that you come out, and if you're anywhere in the SoCal area, you definitely want to try this game.
And Mad Catz is going to be providing, I think, all the joysticks for every station there.
Right.
So you get to check out the new Mad Catz stick.
Right.
Not the red one, but the new one that's coming out. So,
right.
Yeah.
And it'll be really cool to see people. Obviously everybody's goal when a new game comes out is to break it ASAP.
And that is the best thing to do. That's the favorite thing to do in any fighting game, is who can come up with that broken technology first.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's a cool thing. There's always a race to see who comes up with the most broken stuff the fastest, and so we'll be trying to do that. But that's not really what we're going to be talking about tonight. Actually, tonight we're going to be talking about tier lists.
Yep. And, speaking of trying to break games, usually the result of breaking a game is what ends up in tier lists. And, unfortunately, with a lot of fighting games, tier lists start to dominate kind of, people's thoughts and processes with fighting games. They almost kind of jump in wanting to know the tier list right away.
Yeah.
And so, it's a hot topic. It's one of those things that a contentious topic, I should say.
Definitely.
So we kind of want to talk about, tier list, how they affect the game and such.
Right.
So.
I mean, like you said, when somebody new comes into an established game, it's a common question to ask who's the best and who's the worst. Not even necessarily because you want to play the best, but just it's a good idea to try to get some info about the game, and people look at tier lists as showing that kind of information. So
right, and if you remember, at one point in time, I think someone asked me how do you choose your character and whatever.
Yeah.
And I kind of made the joke, a lot of people on the stream were making the joke, pick top tier.
Yeah.
Just go with Wesker or something like that. So pick
a top tier.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's not necessarily what you have to do, but obviously tier lists will be a good indication of who you're going to go up against a lot, and if you want to practice against any specific characters, that's what you're going to go with. So
as far as As far as tier lists go, I feel like it's important to just like set out at the start like what it means to say that a character is high tier or low tier, and like what a tier list in general is talking about. And there are like a couple different ways to think about it, right? Like you can think about it as being based on matchups that a character has. If a character has a ton of good matchups, might be higher tier. Or you might think about it as being like about tournament results.
Right.
If a character is like practically speaking a good tournament character, that is, if the character can deal with the characters that will be in tournaments, then it's good. Right. And so there are these different ways.
Yeah, I mean, right from the get-go, a lot of people talk about tier lists, and I don't even think a lot of people quite even understand what's going on. They just want to know who's top tier. And, you can have characters. I mean, like, one of my favorite examples of a very strange character is always Honda from Super Turbo, right? Because he's kind of this weird. He destroys so many characters in that game. Like, he just blows up so many characters in that game. But he's not top tier. Like, and I don't think he can ever be considered top tier, despite having a bunch of matchups that he blows characters up.
Right.
And that's solely because he also dies really badly to, for example, Ryu and Old Sagat.
Yeah. I mean, he's a character who, about a third of his matchups, he dominates. About a third, he gets his ass kicked. And then about a third, he's pretty much even. Right. So he's got this all over the board sort of set.
But the interesting thing about Honda is I feel like he would actually be higher tier if the third that he destroyed were top tier characters.
Yes, definitely. I agree with that. Unfortunately for him, it's not really like that. It's strange because people often say he loses to Fireball characters, but he doesn't have that bad a matchup against like Dalsum and stuff. So it's not really that black or white. But you're right that if the characters that he beat, like Cammy and Zangief and
Fei Long
and Fei, if those were the top tier characters in the game and not characters that give him a little more trouble, like Old Sagat and Claw and Ryu and DJ, if those weren't the high tier characters, it'd be different. So anyway, this is kind of a way to think about like how like whether tiers in matchups matter.
Right. I mean, sometimes you see I think one of the most famous methods of coming up with a tier chart is everybody's seen that nice little grid with all the matchups, and they put all the numbers and they total all the matchups together. Right. And then, like, oh, this character is top tier because he has the most points out of everybody, who wins. And, that's generally, to be honest with you, I think it's a good starting point, but I don't think it's accurate at all, really.
Right. I mean, I don't agree either. So Honda's a good example. But there are lots of other examples of characters who blow up a certain part of the cast that's not really that relevant when it comes to tier lists. So I also think about like Vanilla Street Fighter for Zangief, who did really well against a lot of the lower section of the cast. He did really well.
Right.
When it came to what was probably the top tier with like Sagat and Ryu and Seth and Akuma, he just could not keep up. He got destroyed.
Right.
And so no matter, even if for Zangief, his matchups were like, common way to talk about matchups is to say that there are two numbers out of 10, 6 to 4 or 5 to 5. This means that a character will win 6 out of 10 and lose 4 out of 10, or go even, meaning win 5, lose 5. So if Zangief goes 6-4 against, how many characters in that game? 17 characters in arcade.
Right.
If he beats, 13 characters 6-4, and then he gets destroyed 3-7 by the top tier characters, he's just not top tier.
Yeah, he's not.
He can't be, because when it comes to tournaments and when it comes to real life competition, he's just not going to keep up.
Right. And it's funny that you mentioned Zangief in particular, because I remember when AE first came out in the arcades, I think it was Daigo who was quoted as saying that Zangief was going to be top tier in that game solely because he was good at fighting Yun and Yang. That Yun and Yang were so good that you are going to run into nothing but Yun and Yang. So by default, that made Zangief good. Even if he lost the rest of the cast, he was going to be top tier just because he was going to beat Yun and Yang.
Right. So it was a matchup dependent thing. So these are the two kind of main ways that people go about thinking about tier lists and whether a character fits in at the higher end or the lower end of the tiers, whether you're talking about just matchups overall or tournament viability.
Right. So yeah, I don't know. Tiers are a dangerous thing. Tiers, you do not want to let them like dictate how you feel about matches necessarily. But obviously tiers are very dependent on matchups and how we talk about matchups. And so I guess the question really comes down to, even just from a basic standpoint, a lot of the times when you hear one character beats another character, or like, this is a bad matchup, honestly, what does that mean? Like, from a scientific standpoint, what makes a matchup bad?
Matchups are about options, and they're about characters having the tools to control the other character's options, or to shut them down, or to have something that just makes a character less effective at whatever it is that character wants to do.
Right.
And so you have matchups like a really bad one that we're going to talk about for a little bit, which is in AE 2012 and Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition 2012. T-Hawk gets his ass kicked by Blanca. We actually spent a little bit of time thinking about the worst matchups in this game.
Yeah, right.
And this is up there. This is really a bad one.
And I can't get the video feed of Blanca, but it's all right. Yeah,
you can't get it. Okay,
yeah, it's fine.
Well, no big deal. We were just going to show you some of the reasons why it's bad visually, but we can just talk about them too. It's because T-Hawk has very few ways of approaching that don't just get blown up. That is to say, Blanca has these normals on the ground that are really good at controlling space against a character who's slow and a big target like T-Hawk, and whose normals don't lead to a lot of damage.
Right.
In addition to that, when Blanca gets close to a certain range, he can do balls, and this is both horizontal and vertical balls, and there are different ranges, of course, where they're effective. But there are ranges where he can just basically do balls with impunity and just like not even worry about it too much. And those two things. Well, I guess it's not even just that too. His air normals are amazing against T-Hawk. He has like practical unblockables and like he's got a whole mess of crap that really makes it hard for T-Hawk to get in. T-Hawk wants to get in and play these crazy guessing games. He wants to knock you down and play these crazy guessing games. That's what his whole game is designed around. And he can't get in against Blanca, and once he gets in, it's still hard for him to play those games.
Right, exactly, because it's so easy for Blanca to escape all those situations, especially with like a wake-up EX up ball or something like that,
Yeah, so. Balls, that's right. Whatever, I'm talking about balls, deal with it.
Blanca has some really deadly balls.
He does, dude, let me tell you.
He's a problem.
If he's coming at you with those balls, you just want to stay away. Exactly. Or slap him away.
Yeah, T-Hawk can't handle those balls. That's just the way it works.
It sucks. But so that's an example of a bad matchup, but that's not to say that like Blanca is a top tier character or that T-Hawk is a terrible character, because they still both have these other matchups that are important in talking about tiers.
Right.
So there are some matchups where Blanca does really poorly.
Right.
Like Cammy.
Yes,
right.
Actually,
so he gets killed by Cammy.
Yeah. Very
and
much
there are
so.
matchups where T-Hawk does pretty well. He goes pretty much even against a lot of characters, and he beats some others pretty convincingly. So you have to kind of evaluate all these different things when talking about it.
And I actually want to expand a little bit more on the Blanca T-Hawk matchup, and kind of, not even just that matchup, but in general on some stuff that makes bad matchups. But we'll get to that after a little break. So we'll be right back. Once again, shout outs to Stumblebee, his name was?
Stumblebee, a.k.a. Matt F.
Yes, for the Ultra Chen logo. I feel like we need to sing with it. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ultra Chen TV at the thus far unnamed show here.
Yeah, we're still too lazy and not creative enough to come up with something.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, I was looking at that little picture that we have there.
Yeah.
And for those of you guys who have actually been watching, following Flo's stream and stuff like that, how cool is it that Solgren, the guy who created the game, had put Flo in the game with the Flo face? Yeah. I don't know, that's just what it made me think of. So.
Oh, well, because our little faces are right there?
Yeah, exactly.
Dude, you know what the best part about that is? It's not even that he says, hold that shit. It's that when he's moving around, the little face kind of bounces. It's doing this little boing
exactly,
thing constantly.
Exactly.
That's hilarious. That makes me laugh every time.
It's so awesome. But Yeah, I mean, to get back on topic of the tiers and everything like that, one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about tier-wise, if you guys remember, one of the things that we've been talking about, one of the terms we've been talking about is, dancing, and we've talked about distances. And, you hear it a lot, even when we do commentary, how we're like, oh, he doesn't want to be at this range. He doesn't. So when I was going over that in the first episode, I guess, of First Attack, and I was talking about the Cammy Ryu match. Remember how I was like, in some ranges, Cammy has an advantage, Ryu has an advantage here, and then Cammy has an advantage here.
Right.
One of the things that makes a bad matchup, to be honest with you, is that every distance is disadvantaged.
That's the worst kind of matchup.
Right.
I mean, you want to have a match where, let's talk about like Zangief Sagat, which is still a pretty bad matchup for Zangief.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So Zangief has to deal with Tiger Minefield all the way across the screen. He's got to deal with high Tiger shots and low Tiger shots, and he's not great at getting through them, especially because, well, even once he gets to a certain range, he still has to deal with things like Tiger Knee and Stand Roundhouse that are just really frustrating. It's hard for him to jump too, but once he gets a knockdown, he can do pretty well. He can play these kind of mix-ups that are in his favor. It's not easy for him to get a knockdown, though.
Right.
And that's why the matchup is so bad. But even worse matchups are the ones like T-Hawk Blanca, where you're just not standing anywhere good for it.
And even once you knock him down and get close to him, your matchup is still bad. It's still not good. So there's literally no distance, I feel like, that T-Hawk has an advantage over Blanca.
Right.
So as a character, when you're T-Hawk, there's this point where you're just like, you know what, I'm going to get right here, because this is a better distance for me. It's just not going to happen, you know? And even in some distances, I always like to do these poker analogies, and, there's like these concept of pot odds in poker, where you calculate the pot odds that, oh, this is worth it trying to win this much money because, 1 out of every 5 times I'm going to win this. So, et cetera. I don't want to get too much into pot odds and everything like that. But, a lot of ways in Street Fighter, I feel like there's pot odds situation as well. Mm-hmm. So even, when T-Hawk knocks Blanca down, or just in certain situations, there's actually a decent mind game that T-Hawk can play against Blanca, right? The problem with it is that if T-Hawk guesses right, he might do a chunk of damage.
Yeah.
If Blanca guesses right, he might do a little more damage and then get away, which is more valuable than just getting that little bit of damage. Right. Or in certain situations, like, for example, let's say I'm going up against a Ryu who has 2 blocks of meter and a full ultra stocked up, and I'm going to go for a throw. Mm-hmm. So if I'm right, I get my throw damage.
Right.
If he's right and he uppercut FADC and ultras me, I lose this much damage, right? Obviously, that's a very specific situation based on meter and ultras and stuff like that, and that changes a lot of the mind games in certain situations. But in a lot of fighting games, not even just Street Fighter 4, there's situations where you can go for this crazy mix-up game, and if the pot odds are just not in your favor, so that, let's say it's a 50-50, but every time you guess right, they lose this much, and if they guess right, you lose this much. Mm-hmm. That's not a 50-50.
Right,
it's not a real 50-50 situation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
you have to weight it differently. So these are the kind of things that come in when considering a matchup, and like we were saying earlier, matchups are one of the ways to figure out whether a character is high tier or low tier.
Right,
but I guess before we continue talking about that, I feel like we should talk about whether tiers matter. That is to say, like, I know a lot of people who believe strongly in tiers.
Right.
But I also know a lot of people who don't believe as strongly in tiers.
Yeah.
And I feel like the people who believe strongly in tiers are the good players. And the people who don't, well, that's not always the case, because there are definitely players who are really good who don't put that much stock in tiers. But,
right.
But to not recognize that a character has an advantage matchup or not is a rarity among top level fighting game players.
It's kind of interesting because I'm a firm believer in tiers, which means I'm awesome. No, I'm just kidding. No, I am a firm believer in tiers. And I was having a conversation with Muffin Man recently, and he doesn't really believe in tiers. Right. And we were kind of having this discussion about it. And, it's really interesting because, on the one hand, he basically said that if two people play each other enough, eventually a matchup becomes even. And we've talked about this a lot. Like, for example, Online Tony and Hugo 101, when they play at Wednesday Night Fights, obviously they've played each other like 7,000 gazillion times. In fact, after Online Tony won the last tournament, I told him that we said Hugo 101 has probably been the victim of more Seth Perfects than the entire arcade combined, and he laughed. Because I think he knows it's true,
Probably
right?
true.
Yeah. But, the interesting thing is, we always talk about it when they play each other, that they've played each other so much that they're, like, when they play each other, it's probably a 50-50 game.
But that said, Hugo 101 goes with Yun in that match against Seth and not with Bison.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. And it's not that over time he feels like the matchup has gotten even. He's felt like over time Bison is not as good against Seth as Yun is. So that's and I talked about it with him. It's mainly because of damage output that he prefers Yun.
Interesting. Okay.
Damage output and like kind of getaway options. But so there he takes the matchup into account. And okay, over time you're going to figure stuff out about your opponent and his his or her tendencies.
Yes.
And that'll change the matchup that you two are playing.
Yes.
But when we're talking about tiers and matchups, right? We're not really talking about like James Chen versus Ultra David, right? We're talking about like if you were to take like 1,000 players and they're all really strong, and then you had them all play every matchup, like what happens over time?
Right.
So that's like a way to think about matchups, and it's like for me, in my opinion, it's foolish to ignore matchups, and it's not just that. Like so I feel like the benefit to ignoring matchups is like that you get to say, oh, it's just about me and my opponent, and that's kind of nice from like a mental perspective. But when it comes to what you really play, you have to understand what your disadvantages are and what your advantages are for your character, not just for you. Because if you don't understand that well enough, you can't create a strong enough strategy to overcome whatever it is that you have to overcome, or to deal with whatever it is that's easily dealt with by your character. So you have to take these things into account, even if it's just implicitly.
Right, and this is not to say that if you recognize a match is a bad matchup, that you should give up and immediately switch characters on that matchup or something.
I definitely want to talk about that. Even admitting tier lists, that's not. I don't think a tier list should be a guide for picking a character. For example, Justin Wong in the Street Fighter 4 series has played Rufus for most of the time. He's occasionally gone to other characters.
Right.
But overall, he's tended to stick with Rufus. At no point do I think that Rufus has been top tier.
Vanilla was the closest one.
Definitely the closest
one. In fact,
I agree with that.
He was maybe top 5 in Vanilla.
I don't think so. I don't think he was top 5. But that said, he does really well with the character because it fits the kind of style that he wanted to play in Street Fighter 4. He wanted to play a more offensive style, and he picked a perfect character to do it, and it fit. And he knows how to do it really well, and he understands matchups really strongly, and he knows how to play against players really well. And so this is a character that really fits for him. If he had picked, a top tier character in Vanilla early on, let's just say he picked Sagat
or M. Bison
or something like that, right? Like I don't feel like that would have fit his style well enough.
Yeah,
you gotta pick on your style, and for some people that is going to be a top tier character just because that character is top tier, just happens to be, and for others it's not going to be. So like my style was Zangief and Dhalsim, and I don't think, like we were saying, I don't think either one was top tier in Vanilla.
But you're going to do better with them than...
I would definitely do better with them because those are the characters that fit me.
Right, and actually there is something that Frames Chen pointed out that I kind of wanted to mention. He mentioned, apparently there's a conversation going on about Viper here.
Yeah.
And obviously she's top tier, right? I mean, I don't think anybody's going to argue that she's top tier.
Well, we'll talk about that in a bit, but there have been some players who will argue that.
But. Okay, so here's something interesting about Viper is that she's hard to use. Making her top tier is difficult. And going into tier lists, honestly ignores that. That's one thing I think that needs to be established, that, you know, when you talk about tier list, you're talking about optimally using the character.
Oh, yeah, right. So definitely, the effectiveness of the character is going to be really different depending on who is using him and what level of play. And there's a level of play where Viper's ass. Yeah. In fact, that's like most players.
Right.
Where she kind of sucks.
Yeah. I mean, I will admit, like, when I went to the first fight club for Street Fighter 4, I chose Viper because there was no Cammy at the time. So I was like, okay, this is kind of...
You got to go with the girl.
Yeah, she's got the one pony, one pigtail, right? So I was like, all right, I'll go with Viper.
All right, fair enough.
And then when I found out how she's really played, I was just like, no, I don't want to learn. I don't want to learn this. I don't even want to bother. And I like execution. Like, I love doing crazy combos. That's true. And I did not want to learn Viper because it was just, I felt like it was too much effort for what it was worth. So
that actually brings up a point that I'd like to talk about, which is the evolution of matchups and tier lists in games.
Oh yeah,
because it's really changed a lot in all sorts of games. Every game that changes, it's never the same at the end as at the start. And Viper is definitely an example of that. But first, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be ready with a little bit more tier list talk on Ultra 10 TV.
All right. Woo.
All right, cool.
All right, everybody. Whoops.
Oh, hello. Yeah.
Technology.
Sports.
I still have not figured out this technology quite yet.
I know, dude. 2012?
I know.
It's crazy.
There we go.
Hey, what's up, folks?
Okay, cool.
So we're talking about tier lists, and something that was just brought up before the break that I really want to expand on is the evolution of tier lists and matchups.
Yeah.
And one way to introduce this is Viper. So in vanilla Street Fighter 4, she's been changed over the versions, but not too much.
Probably the least.
I
would say out of every character in the game.
Probably the least. But at the start, we thought she was crappy. We really did.
Yes.
And not even for a small period of time. For months. It was maybe half a year before I first saw a competent Viper, and a lot longer before I was worried about her with any of my characters. Even with Balsam, I just wasn't worried.
And it was one of those situations where I feel like the only good Viper player at the time was Combo Fiend. And Combo Fiend is notorious for taking, low-tier characters and making them good. So even when Combo Fiend was doing well with Viper, it never felt like, oh, this Viper really has potential. You know?
I mean, and it's not like Combo Fiend was even playing her at the start, I don't think. I think he was messing around with other characters for a while.
Right.
And it wasn't until some Japanese players started really making her look good that we kind of reevaluated it.
Yeah.
And now everybody thinks she's awesome, even though she's been very little changed. And looking back on vanilla, she was probably one of the better characters in that game.
I think if vanilla lasted long enough, Viper probably would have been top 3 in that game.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like she is really, really good in that game. But at the start, we thought she sucked, and it was the same way with E Honda. He ended up obviously being really good.
Right. I remember by the end of vanilla, there were some Japanese players who was actually saying Honda was potentially top 5
I remember
vanilla.
hearing that too.
Yeah, and it was only Sagat that was his problem. But we talked about that. Obviously, if one of the top tier characters is a bad matchup, you're not really great. But Honda beat everybody else.
Right.
It was only Sagat, so he was still good enough to be considered, top 5 in that game.
Right. So and it wasn't just on that side of characters starting off crappy and ending up really good. It was the other way around. So Zangief was thought to be super good at first. He was a problem. And obviously we recognized right from the start that he lost to Sagat, but everybody else we thought he did really well against.
Right.
And over time, people kind of figured out what to do against Zangief and how to treat him. You couldn't treat him like a regular character. You had to play differently, and people figured that out over time.
Right.
And towards the end, it's not like Zangief ended up being bad, but he was definitely not among the top 5.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of go off on a little tangent here, we talk about this all the time. In fact, one of another good friend of ours, Derek Daniels, we talk to him about this all the time. But at the start of every game's life cycle, the grappler is always really good.
Yep, for sure.
For some reason, the grappler is amazing, and by the end of the life cycle, the grappler is ass.
Yep, that's pretty much
really
true.
Horrible. And we're talking about Zangief and Viper. It's so funny because in vanilla, that was a match that was considered 8-2.
It was so free.
Yeah, Viper.
It was so free.
Died for free, and I even got in arguments with my brother about how bad that match was for Viper. And by the end of the life cycle, Viper beat Zangief.
I literally think that she beats Zangief, and especially now after Zangief has been weakened a bit. But even in Vanilla, I felt like that was a problem match for Zangief come the end of the game.
And good point from Doc Holliday. Potemkin actually stayed really good.
Potemkin was good. Yeah. And
So good.
I mean, it's not always right. Like Zangief ended up being pretty good in Alpha 2, but like not necessarily for the same reasons as he was good at the start. In any case, a game always matures, and we don't want to just be talking about Street Fighter 4 here.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the best examples of this is actually Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, where for the longest time we thought that T-Hawk sucked. This is a game that came out in '94. Okay, so we've been playing it for 18 years,
Right.
and for half that lifetime, more than half that lifetime, we thought that he sucked. And then somebody found, I don't know who found this originally, somebody in Japan found amazing technology for T-Hawk that essentially allowed him to get a corner infinite.
Quote infinite.
Right, a corner infinite grab loop, which was inescapable. And then somebody found a way that it was even more inescapable for more characters because essentially once you got to the corner, there was this ridiculous thing where you get either a throw if the opponent is throwable, or your invincible dragon punch if anything else happens, and that invincible dragon punch beats almost everything. So once you're in the corner, you're dead.
And shout outs to Damn Die and Seb.
Yeah,
you can look it up. They did a Super Turbo Saturday. They had this series of videos, and one of the episodes was about T-Hawk and his inescapable loop.
Right.
And how you have to do like some weird code that looks like an omega symbol.
Yep. It's crazy, dude.
And it's an option select. And it's obviously characters. The matches change after time because of new technology. New things are found. I mean, let's talk about CVS2. And let's talk about what roll canceling did to the tier list.
Mm-hmm. Totally flipped it up.
Yeah, as soon as roll canceling was discovered, the whole game became a different game all of a sudden.
Yes.
And it's these kind of technologies that can potentially just completely alter tier lists. Yeah, obviously CVS2 is the extreme example, right?
Right. But the reason I think ST is so interesting is that the other characters, the matchups change too. Of course, things people figured out how to do stuff. But this is a really stark example where a character goes from bottom 5 to probably top 5, and that changes all of his matchups. But it's important to think about the effect on the rest of the game too, on the tiers in general. So characters that do well against T-Hawk are now more relevant for tier lists.
Not Cammy, but
definitely Cammy. So Cammy's one of the characters that I think is important to talk about because she blows T-Hawk up.
Yep.
It's so hard for T-Hawk to do anything there. So she is now a more important character.
Yeah, it's so
because
funny.
of that match.
At Wednesday Night Fights, speaking of Muffin Man, he's the guy who throws that Super Turbo tournaments every week. So shout outs to him, right? There's a player at Wednesday Night Fights, Paper Cut, who's getting really good at T-Hawk's unblockable, like his crazy corner loop and stuff like that, right? Every week that we've played, I've run into him, and it's been super unfortunate for him. And this has nothing to do with I'm better than him, or it's a crappy matchup.
Right.
We've talked about what makes matchups bad. And the first week that I didn't play, he won.
Oh, is that so? That's hilarious. I actually ran into him last week. I play E Honda in that game.
Right.
And although I don't think it's as much of a base as some people think, he definitely beats T-Hawk.
Yes.
And so it was just, sorry, dude. Like you ran into Honda. Like I know how to play the match.
Right.
And that's hard for you. And it's not like a free matchup or anything, but it's a matchup that my character wins. So my character and yours are both more relevant.
I think the week that he won was the week that neither of us played.
I wasn't there either.
It was the first week of Wednesday Night Fights back in 2012, and since it was so packed, we just chose not to enter ST.
Yeah.
And Paper Cut won that one because he didn't have to run into Honda or he didn't have to run into Cammy.
So there you go. Let's also talk about Marvel 2. And how in early times of that game's life,
Ice Beam.
You look at it back then, and it just doesn't even look like the same game. It looks completely different, not just because of tier lists, but because we figured out how to move and how to do combos and what matchups were and assists and all that stuff. But the result of that is that the tier lists are 100% different.
Yeah, the reason why I referenced Iceman was because he was considered so high tier at the start of MVC2 because he didn't take chip damage from beams.
Right.
Like and his assist where he did the beam was so good, and everyone thought Iceman was amazing. And nowadays, you don't even see Iceman. Like
Yeah,
in
you
top
never
level
see
play,
Iceman.
he's not even a factor.
Right.
He's not even mentioned, you know. And even characters like Spiral. Like when Duck got good at Spiral, Spiral was considered amazing. Like during that run of B4, B5
Right.
era when Duck was winning, Spiral was considered probably one of the top 5 characters in the game. And to be honest with you, after a while, she just dropped off because literally nobody could do it like Duck could, and it turned out she just, once you figured out the timing to push block to escape those traps, and you know Spiral had no life, so she was kind of like a pseudo Strider. She would just die in one combo.
Right.
So even you know a character like Spiral who has this amazing trap, as soon as people figured out how to get past it, she dropped like immediately in rankings, and nowadays in top 8 you'll never see Spiral. Like you just don't see her at all anymore.
But you see Magneto all the time.
Yeah.
And I always want to preface this by saying I didn't play Marvel 2. So this is not firsthand, but I remember stories of people saying like, oh, like to their buddy, like, hey, this character Magneto, it's gonna end up good, and the other person would be like, are you serious? How do you see that?
Right.
And nobody believed it, and it didn't take it. I say it did take quite a while for Magneto to end up good.
Right. And interestingly enough, too, I mean, let's talk about Cable.
Yeah.
Cable with Air Hyper Viper Beam times
Right.
4 or whatever like that was number 1 in the game for a very long
Right.
time. And while he's
Found
still,
pretty early.
Yeah. And while he's still a good character, he's not even top 3 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Top 3 are Magneto, Storm, and Sentinel. And it just basically, Marvel 2 became so important with movement that the top characters were the ones with the air dash and the fly-unfly Sentinel stuff. And Cable's serious lack of movement options has relegated him to 4th best in the game, maybe not even 4th. You know, there's some characters that might be considered better than him.
Yeah, he's still a good character, but definitely things have changed for him.
Yeah.
Definitely no longer the same.
Yeah, even it dropping from 1st to 4th, I think, is a significant tier change.
Especially in that game.
Yeah, especially in that
Right.
game. So,
So this is kind of a let's go back to whether you need to pay attention to tiers. When a game is relatively new, I feel like you don't have to pay attention to them as closely because you can be the guy who says, "Hey, this character Magneto gonna end up good," and you can be the guy who's invents all the tech and invents the movement and invents this character that ends up being super good. And it's the same way with T-Hawk. Maybe somebody saw back in the day like, oh, if I negative edge 360, probably not, but but so you can influence the changes.
Right. And early on I think is the most important part because the top tier tech hasn't been discovered yet.
Right.
So you have a better chance with your characters to do well.
Exactly.
You know?
Right. But even if it's been a while for a game, one example is Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, where for a long time the game's been out for a dozen years, but it took a long time for characters like Hugo and Q to not be ass.
Right.
They were ass for a long time, but people started to really figure out how to play matchups and how to kind of like milk everything out of the character that they possibly could. And once they finally started to do that, they both moved up in the tiers a little bit. And Hugo is a decent character now. Nobody's going to accuse him of being top tier, but he's a decent character, and you can be the guy who believes in your character enough to get him there.
And and I actually really want to talk a little bit about Third Strike because one of Muffin Man's main arguments that that tier lists don't exist is, and people are spamming his name in the chat right now, is Kuroda, right? Obviously, he uses low tier characters and he wins every tournament.
Right.
And so, he doesn't win every tournament,
No,
but
I mean,
he certainly wins a lot of
really
tournaments. And and he
Everybody knows he's
actually
good.
asked me, what's my argument against that? If he's winning with Q, doesn't that mean that there's no tier lists? And my two main arguments against that is, one, if Kuroda picked Yun, he would kill you way faster. And he even Muffin Man even kind of referenced that a little bit when he said there was a tournament that Kuroda played Akuma.
Yeah.
And he got so many perfects.
Right.
He doesn't get perfects with Q.
I know what he's talking about. Yeah, so Kuroda is thought to be the best user of about a third of the cast.
Right.
In Third Strike. He's a genius.
Yeah.
And if he really took the time to be good at other games, absolute belief that he would be top 5 in whatever he would play, because he's amazing. And it literally took half a dozen years and a genius to make Q not look like ass.
Right.
And after that, other players like TM and a few others picked up the character and really studied up and made him look okay.
Right.
He's not good still, but they made him look okay. But nobody has really... I shouldn't say that. But nobody at the start made him look like a decent character except for one guy, and that's got to tell you something about the effectiveness of the character.
And plus, the other thing is, I honestly think that in terms of player rankings in Third Strike, here's Kuroda, and, like, there's everybody else. Like, I don't think anyone comes close to Kuroda. And the other argument that I had to Muffin Man was, why doesn't Kuroda pick Chun-Li?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to reference Princess Bride, one of my favorite movies, actually, you know, honestly, is Inigo Montoya, right?
Yeah.
Too easy if he fences right-handed.
Right.
So he's got to go left-handed to challenge himself, right?
Yeah.
That's exactly what Kuroda's doing.
He's like Oro. He's putting one hand in the little sack.
Exactly. The reason why he doesn't play Chun-Li, and you never see him play Chun-Li, is because he knows it's not going to be fun for him.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be a challenge. I think if he plays Chun-Li, he will be undefeatable. If he plays Yun, I think he will be undefeatable.
I mean, he played a really strong Ken and a really strong Akuma, and those are both top 8 characters. And I think he won SBO both times. Might be wrong about that. I can't remember offhand now, but that sounds right. In any case, when he plays a strong character, he does better.
Right, exactly.
Surprise, surprise.
So, you know, I don't think... You know, Kuroda doing well with Q doesn't mean that the game has no tiers.
No.
I just think that means Kuroda is that much better than everybody else.
Right, and there are examples of that in lots of different games, where somebody is just known for being really good with a character that's not considered very good.
Right.
It happens in Street Fighter and in Marvel, and it happened in ST and CVS2 and Marvel 2. And
look at iPeru at SoCal Regionals.
He got 3rd place with a character in Fuerte who... You know, is probably a little underrated, but is not a top tier or a high tier character.
Right. And it's so funny. Someone actually just said, talk about Hakan. I wanted to bring up Hakan.
We'll talk about Hakan.
Because I still stand by my claim that, so in both games, that I still say Rocket Raccoon is going to be amazing in Marvel as soon as someone finally takes the time to learn him. And I honestly think Hakan is going to easily be top 10. Maybe even top 5 is hard just because the top 5 is so strong in that game. But I think Hakan is going to be amazing.
Well, okay. I just
in 2012.
Before we actually talk about what we think the tier lists are in that game, I just want to respond to Wokian, who just wrote something that went off screen. Are they saying the player's skill is more of a factor than the tier list? No, I'm not. If a player is way better than somebody else, in a disadvantaged matchup, then I like that player. But if we're talking about kind of a skill parity, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about making tier lists, as we said earlier, you try to like think about over time and in equal situations who will end up on top. In that kind of a situation, I definitely like tiers. Even if there's a little bit of a skill disparity, I still kind of like that. But if there's a player like Kuroda, or again, there's just a ton of examples in different games.
Right. Shout outs to Combo Fiend.
Like Combo Fiend is one of those guys.
He's like the American Kuroda almost in a lot of ways.
Right, so like he's making Oni work for him, and he made characters in CVS2 and Marvel work for him.
Last Evo, he almost made top 8 with Guy. And Guy's not a great character, right? So yeah, Combo Fiend definitely is, one of the, he used Elena in Third Strike,
exactly
Rolento, and I'm sorry, Eagle, in CVS2, so he's actually...
Iron Man and stuff in Marvel 2.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, there are lots of examples of that, but I do want to talk about specific tiers. I think that'd be pretty cool. Okay. So when we come back, we're going to take a little bit of a break. We're going to talk about what we think some of the tier lists are in games like AE and Ultimate Marvel 3.
Right. All right.
That's some crazy stuff.
I don't believe that.
Okay, so welcome back to whatever we're calling this show now, the Tuesday show, on Ultra Chen TV. My name is Ultra David, and we have James Chen here as always.
Yep.
We're talking about tier lists, and what we want to talk about now is actual tier lists, like what we think some of the tiers are in Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition and Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. And what we were going nuts about as we came back was that we just brought up Mago's tier list.
I mean, obviously,
from a few days ago,
he has Cammy at top, so I'm always like, "What? He's crazy!"
Right, that blows your mind.
So I hadn't
mind too.
I hadn't even looked at the rest of the tier list at all. Like, I barely paid attention because everyone's like, "Yo, James, what do you think of Mago?" Wait, so I didn't even pay attention to the rest of the tier list.
Right. So you can go check it out. You can search it. It's on Shoryuken and Event Hubs. Mago's partial tier list. Top tier is Cammy, Faye, Ryu, Seth, and Adon. Then upper is Ibuki, Akuma, Ken, Sakura, Makoto, Rufus, and then after that is Yun Yang, Viper, Abel, and Sagat.
This is the close tier.
Right. So this actually reminds me of something we should have talked about earlier, and that is players and areas have different tier lists.
Yes.
And so if in Japan they think differently about Viper, I have to think that it's because they don't have Wolfkrone and Latif. I really think that's true.
And look what happens every time the Japanese players have to fight Wolfkrone and Latif. At Canada Cup, Wolfkrone blew them up.
Epic.
At Evo, Latif blew up a lot of the Japanese players. So a lot of times it just depends on whether or not you have a player that's that good.
Right.
In your vicinity.
And it's not just individual players, it's kind of like the play style. So different places have more offensive styles or more defensive styles or styles that are more random or less random. It's really interesting to travel around and see. Actually, it's less now because of YouTube and streams, but back in the day it was really noticeable. I would go to school up in NorCal and live down in SoCal, and it was so noticeable, the difference in Third Strike between the two areas. It was obvious.
And you know what one of the best examples is CVS2.
Yeah,
West Coast, East Coast.
Right.
West Coast was all end groove, dash jab, dash jab, dash jab. And then East Coast was my jumping off the wall, dive away, run away, Vega sitting there hitting stand roundhouse and kicking. And you know why? It's because the top player in West Coast was Alex Vi. Top player in East Coast was Eddie Lee. And those two players being the best in their areas define the play style. Eddie Lee is a defensive player.
Yeah.
And, and one thing I want to say, by the way, is the stigma of being a turtle, quote, defensive player being, bad or not preferable. Please get rid of that. Get rid of that
Needs
mentality. That there's no such thing. So when I say Eddie Lee is a defensive player, he's a turtle, I mean that in the most positive.
Because he was awesome at it.
Yeah, he was amazing at it.
He actually still is, even though he doesn't play much. He was at a tournament recently, and he did really well.
Yeah, exactly. and so that defined the East Coast play. And then here, Vi was beating everyone with crazy Ryu dash low jab end groove stuff, and that was defining the play here, and that's what created this dichotomy between the coasts.
Right, exactly.
Depend on who you're playing against.
So when you see a tier list from somebody like Mago and he has Viper, like what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, at least 12, 11 characters at least are better than her. You gotta think it's in part because he just doesn't see Wolfkrone and Latif very often, and and the style of play is not the kind of style that lends itself to Viper dominance.
Right. And, I'm from the discussions that I've had with a lot of people, everyone's always saying, like, Viper's guaranteed top 3. Viper's guaranteed top 3.
I think so.
So it's crazy to see a player like this who's so good, putting Viper.
But we're definitely also influenced by that same kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So part of the reason that I think that Viper's amazing is because the two players who use her here do really, really well in a ton of different matchups, in a ton of different tournaments all over the country, and all over the continent. And I see that, and that influences what I think about the character. And so I think Viper is really good. I have Viper top 2 free. I have Seth and Viper, and then I have like 10 other characters. I have really more like 15 to 20 other characters.
Right.
So in Marvel 3, there's kind of the same thing. It's not quite as stark, but people are talking about Morgan in the chat, and how in New York Morgan looks amazing, and in SoCal we have no Morgans.
Well, one of the things that's really important to mention about Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is that tier lists are highly warped. Like in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, if you noticed, the tier list isn't even really a tier list. The tier list is literally the best team is MSP, or I don't even know which.
I
It
don't
was
know. I've
MSS,
stopped paying
I think.
attention.
I think
Okay.
MSS was the best tier. I think. I'm not sure, but obviously, it became this team beat this team beat that team, and while Magneto, Storm, and Sentinel were the best characters, it didn't really matter. It really mattered about the team,
Mm-hmm.
and so Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is very much the same way.
Right.
So let's talk about Morrigan a little bit. Morrigan, Chris G makes Morrigan look amazing. Dominion makes Morrigan. I don't know who Dominion's team is, though.
It's Joe Strange Morgan.
Okay, so I know for me personally, the reason why Chris G's Morrigan is so amazing, 100% is Doom's hidden missiles.
Missiles are so good with Morgan. It's so stupid,
That
but awesome.
Yeah, like if there was no Doom hidden missiles, Chris G's Morrigan, while good, would not be great. Like it wouldn't look as impossible to make it through as it is. And even Chris G has admitted this himself. If he actually took the time to learn some Morrigan combos, like his Morrigan would be amazing. But he does very simple combos when he gets in because he's focused on one area with the Doom missiles. And so that's enough. That's enough to get him by and to have him win tournaments because that's so effective. He
Right.
doesn't need to learn Morrigan combos, But that's because he has Doom missiles there. If he didn't have Doom missiles, then Chris G would really have to, I think, brush up a little bit on them. Not saying that he doesn't know Morrigan combos, but Morrigan's developed a lot of new combos because her fly is so much faster. And there's been a lot of new combo technology, that fireball fly, air dash down, fierce fireball, unfly, and all sorts of stuff that nobody was doing in vanilla. Those are new combos that people have discovered.
Right. So Morgan in Ultimate Marvel is a good character. Clearly, nobody thinks that she's not.
Mm-hmm.
But I should say that's just now, because in fact I remember talking with somebody at Wednesday Night Fights when Ultimate came out who thought she was bottom 3 easy.
Probably was me.
No, it wasn't you. It wasn't you. It was somebody else. It actually might have been Olaf.
Oh, okay.
Who thought that she was really bad. And that's just not the case. So the game has evolved a little bit, and we're seeing things. But still on the West Coast, we don't have the top level Chris/Dominion level Morgan.
Right.
And so we haven't really had to develop like an appreciation for it. And we see it on streams, but we haven't really had to figure it out. And so that really like influences what we think about the tier lists. As you were saying, it's a team game, but even if it's not a team game, if you just think about Morgan being really good, the fact that she controls so much space so well and is so good at chip, that changes a lot of matchups.
Right.
It really changes a lot of matchups. And you have to think not only about what that changes for Morgan herself, but about what it changes for lots of other characters who have difficulty getting around that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And it's really interesting too, because let's talk a little bit about Iron Fist.
Yeah.
And Justin's Iron Fist. Justin has said, he actually has an interesting tiering in that he actually will not rate characters that need teams to help him high. He refuses. So he actually thinks Iron Fist is really bad.
Right.
He said Rocket Raccoon is not good. He said Doctor Strange is not good. All based on the fact that he says when they are by themselves, they are ineffective characters, that they need to have assists. And so, that kind of falls into that whole team thing. So even though Justin is sitting there winning with Iron Fist, he himself doesn't think he's very good because he knows he's good. I mean, when we analyze that match, how much of that was Akuma doing all the work, right?
Huge.
So, Justin recognizes the fact that he's getting away with everything because of Akuma.
Right.
And not necessarily because Iron Fist is good.
Right. And I guess looking at the time, we're not going to have the ability to go through like full tier list ideas, but you did bring up Hakan, and I did want to talk about Hakan and Dan because I get flack from people who think that these characters suck, and that's unfortunate because they're characters that have a lot of ability, and while I don't really agree with you that Hakan has top 5 potential, I definitely do think that he is top 10 potential.
Right.
I think that 30 characters maybe 25 characters have top 10 potential.
Right.
But Dan is maybe like an interesting example because this is a character that if he did not have the name Dan, would have not been slept on at any point in this game's lifetime.
Yeah.
If he had just been called like Joe or like Bob or like something. And if he didn't have this ridiculous persona, people would have investigated him and like, or what if his name
was something better than Joe or Bob?
Well, okay, fine. What if his name was like Jessica and he was a pretty girl and he had all these things?
free.
He would have been so investigated, and nobody would be sleeping on this dude.
I mean, let's talk about Marvel Madness last year in Canada, where Justin almost blew up air with Dan. Right? I mean, that showed he was not a bad character. He
hasn't been at any point, but he gets slept on, and that's so like so. I'm sticking out this position of I don't care about tier lists to some extent, because I believe that I know more than everybody else does about these characters, and I feel like nobody knows. Very few people know like Dan versus whatever match better.
And shout outs to Anon27. He says if Dan was a girl, then I would main her.
Of course.
Free, done.
Of course you would, because she's got all these. She would have all these fun tools.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
you don't see that. So that's an interesting side of tier lists, that you can like stake out a position where you can be like the guy who makes a character.
Right.
And that's really fun. Yeah. So it's you can stay away from tier lists to an extent.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I would love to go on about tiers all
me
day.
Too. We could totally talk about this for the next 2 hours.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, it's 9:00 right now, and Cross Counter Live is about to start. I'm sure a lot of people have that on, and this is going to be a crazy episode because Sundance from MLG is going to be on the episode.
I would love to also be on that episode. Oh well.
So I mean, seriously, guys. Go to Cross Counter, watch this. I think this is going to be a super important episode.
That's at thestream.tv. That's where you can find that. Yeah, go check it out. If you didn't hear, MLG is going to have an event that will be exclusively pay-per-view only.
For $20.
For $20 for the weekend. It's not one of the main tournaments. It's kind of like a trial sort of thing, but there's been a lot of people blowing up about it one way or the other. Brian Gutex came out in favor of it on Twitter, and they're going to have Sundance on, so it'll be interesting to see what they talk about there.
Yep. So definitely tune over to the stream.tv. I'm sure Steve is doing his thing right now, holding it down. So
that's right. So okay, I guess that's all we're going to do for tonight, unfortunately. We'd both love to keep talking, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, and sorry, this whole episode was just us talking. Like I said, I had the video feed to show some examples. Didn't quite work, but we're working through these kinks right now. So
okay, cool. Well, my name is Ultra David. You can find me on Twitter at Ultra David.
And I'm James Chen. You can find me at jchensor.
And you can find us both at Ultra Chen TV or on Facebook.com/Ultra Chen TV.
YouTube.com/Ultra
Chen TV. That's right, everything. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific.
All right. Thanks, guys.